Week for the What's happening, fellas? It's your boy Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast 139, coming at you on Monday the 20th of whatever month this is, and I'm just enjoying the reactions to Brock Lesnar winning the Money in the Bank match, despite not being in it. Fantastic. There are now two companies who are convinced that Brock Lesnar is absolutely what everyone wants to see, and their fan bases are just like, no, we don't actually care. Still, it tells you something that the WME management of the UFC are as out of touch with their fan base as Vince McMahon is, because he's pretty much the gold standard in being out of touch. But anyway, we had an interesting weekend of fights. It was pretty good. There was one event, and then there was a UFC event. Not an awful lot of news this week. Rashad Evans is going into the UFC Hall of Fame, which is fantastic. If they could just keep him off commentary or, analysis, that'd be great. He's just a rambling mess on the desk, but he is a good guy, and he was a very effective fighter in his time. And he was the UFC light heavyweight champion. And it seems like the UFC actually wants to make more of a big deal out of the UFC Hall of Fame now. They're adding people considerably more rapidly, because there are about 6 guys in it for ages. But anyway, let's talk about these events that we watched over the weekend. I mean, the Friday preview of the UFC event I was doing while watching one at the same time. So let's have a look at that one event, because it wasn't bad. I mean, the fights on one are very rarely bad. It's just that everything else that's attached. So, I said I enjoyed Gary Turnan's performance against Yoshiki Nakahara, which was picked up a single leg, jumped on the leg reap and finished an outside heel hook. You don't see those work a lot in high-level grappling. And in fact, in MMA, you see guys slip the heel or lose the knee line quite a lot. But no, he did a fantastic job finishing it. Yoshitaka Naito and Alex Silva then fought, and this was basically a wrestling match in a cage, but in the ring. Everyone who's always saying, like, you can't wall walk in the ring, and there's no stalling along the fence. It literally was that. It was that with ropes. Because the only people who say that have no clue, and they only remember the highlights of Pride. Joe Nato outstopped Sasha Moisa. I think that happened while I was on air. The Tao Miao, blah, blah, blah. Don't care. So then the next... the Amir Khan fight was good. He lost. Quite surprisingly, actually, just got sparked. And then Kozma Alexandra versus... Sage Northcutt. Now, this was an interesting one because people in the know, when this was signed, were like, uh-oh, for Sage. But, it's worked exactly like one wanted it to, because they matched him against this guy with, 100+ kickboxing matches. I mean, he's only got 8 MMA fights when he stepped in the ring with Sage, but only lost his first and has been, on the up since then. Fought in Bellator a few times. But obviously a very dangerous striker. Sage Northcutt is billed as a striker, but he sucks as a striker, which I've said dozens and dozens of times at this point. He had Raymond Daniels in his corner, and I tweeted immediately before the fight, look out for that immediate lead leg side kick that almost always gets him taken down. And he genuinely led with it almost immediately, and then backed himself into the ropes and got hit with an overhand right, which fractured his face in 8 places. Fuck that. Oh, that doesn't sound like fun. But he went into surgery afterwards, got it all fixed up, and that's just rough. I mean, the guy is not he's a good fighter, because he just beat Zach Otto, or whoever it was, but he's not a great fighter. He got dropped by Mickey Gall, and his striking is the letdown. He's got 77 world karate titles, which I noticed even one were embarrassed to actually mention. They just called him a world karate champion. But basically... his titles are in tricking and doing shit with a, ultra lightweight bow staff and bodybuilding. He's a karate champion in the same way that Taylor Lautner is a karate champion. But if you watch his fights, the success he's had has always been taking dudes down with a good double leg and then pounding them from the top or occasionally getting a submission. His striking is stepping right hand, stepping left hand. Occasional side kick that does less damage than it does put him in a bad position. But man, this one really went viral. Everyone saw it, and that's the point. No, I mean, a few people saw Demetrius Johnson struggle with that lad that they put him in against, and were like, "Wow, this lad's pretty good. Keep an eye on him." And some people saw Eddie Alvarez get sparked by Nasty Uken. I love it because it could be the punch or it could be the person called the Nasty Uken. But this one everyone saw, because for better or worse, the UFC's marketing of Sage Northcutt, in spite of how not great he was, did make him generally known. So be excited for Kozma Alexandra's future. I hope Sage Northcutt was getting that Eddie Alvarez 8-figure contract, because otherwise they just done him dirty. Anyway, so then we're talking about the Grand Prix. Is it a Grand Prix if it doesn't happen in one night? The ONE FC kickboxing tournament at £155. And this was the one that I wrote about in my Patreon boy piece this week for the Patreon boys. Basically, I opened with a note of, this could not happen. We could not get Yod versus Giorgio. It's a tournament. There's a chance that one of them doesn't get through. But all being well, and then I continued into talking about the fights. And then it came out, and both Giorgio Petrosian and Yod Sinclair lost their matches, which is incredible. Giorgio's a lot less convincing, but he was doing... I mean, I was talking about his more aggressive style that he showed against Sogro, and, he's always fought more aggressive against, like, the scrubs that they put him up against in Italy, when he's doing, like, his brother owns Petrosian Mania, or whatever it is? But he does these fights in Italy, and he fights jobbers because he doesn't knock a lot of people out, and they want people for him to knock out in front of his hometown. But against Sogro, which was his one debut, he was super aggressive, and in this fight he was super aggressive, and it was enjoyable, but he was clearly more hittable. I was saying he's getting caught a lot off the left hand. He was against another southpaw in... They're spelling it differently to how it's spelled on all his online stuff. Yeah, Pechmorakot. I think that's how they're billing him, but it's spelled like 8 different ways on his wiki and his Tapology page. But he was fighting another southpaw in Pechmorakot, and the interesting thing about Pechmorakot, and I said this in my pre-fight article, which you now need to join the Patreon and read just to see how wrong I was, or how naive I was that, these guys will probably get through. But we were talking about Pechmorakot, and what he's generally been best at is putting the pressure on, and he's quite a sort of, like a long clinch fighter. He does a lot of kneeing with one hand on the opponent and landing elbows and things. And Liam Harrison, who's, a British Muay Thai legend, but he's very short compared to Pechmorakot. And he had a fight with him in one, and in the first round, Pechmorakot was trying to kick with him, and Harrison was like slipping and coming back with wicked fast counter kicks and things, and made him look really bad. And in the second round, Pechmorakot came out and basically just ran at him and threw elbows from ran into close range and hammered him with elbows and knocked him out. But Pechmorakot was notable because he had this victory over Senshai, and I think that Senshai's doesn't have a loss since that fight, which was 2014, and that was at the stadium that's not Lumpini, which has letters that shouldn't be next to each other but are next to each other in the name. And that was a great fight because he really he came in behind, like, raised knees, threw lots of feints, and he was just always on top of Senshai. Because Senshai, if you watch him, like, when he's mugging Europeans twice his size, he's standing on the end of their kicking range, and then he'll pull back from their kick and then come in with his flurry of whatever, or his wicked bicycle kick to the gut. But Pechmorakot was just on him. He was just marching in behind his knees, popping him constantly with jabs and straights because he had these long limbs. And then in the 4th and 5th round, he's hammering him with elbows and knees, and Sanshai's just trying to hold and not doing anything when they're out in the open. So it really was very much a Pechmorakot clean victory there. But yeah, against Giorgio Petrosian, he was doing decently. I mean, there wasn't... One of the things coming into this tournament was, like, the rules weren't entirely clear on the app. It had some really vaguely stated rules. But I've seen matches in one that are Muay Thai in 4-ounce gloves, Muay Thai in 8-ounce gloves, kickboxing but allowing dumps, kickboxing but allowing elbows, kickboxing without the elbows, kickboxing without the elbows and the dumps. Yeah, they seem to change week on week. So I was quite interested because I thought if elbows are in, that's a big deal for Pechmorakot. If clinch is in, that's a big deal for Pechmorakot. But he did it without those for the most part. I think they're trying to institute that 3-second rule in the clinch, which fucking sucks. Because it just makes everything vague. Basically, you don't have time to work in the clinch. You just have, like, a stepping knee and then hold for another knee, and it all gets a bit messy. And then, who was it I watched? I think it was Yoshihiro Sato. I was watching him in Glory 8 in Tokyo. He was fighting a Korean who was there to lose to him because he was the local Japanese lad, and he managed to turn the entire crowd against him just by stepping in, holding and kneeing. And the ref would go, 1, 2, 3, in his Japanese voice, and the crowd all start counting along and then booing Sato by the end. And if you know how hard it is to get booed in Japan, that'll tell you how fucking boring that fight was. But yeah, I mean, it looked like he broke Giorgio's nose, or at least, I mean, he bruised up his eye, but I don't know if Giorgio's nose was a mess before he came into the fight, but it looked worse than I'd seen it. And then he got the split decision, Pech Northcutt, and a lot of people were like, split decision, eh? Someone made a lot of money. Super. I mean, on the plus side, Yod lost too, so maybe we get that Yod-Giorgio fight sooner rather than later. But the Yod one was really interesting, because I'd watched I said in my pre-fight piece, what was interesting was that Yod had fought everyone in his bracket before, whereas Giorgio was meeting Pech Northcutt for the first time. But I think it worked the other way, because he fought Sami Sana back in 2013, and Sami Sana's very, very tall for the weight class, and that looked originally in the first round to be giving Yodson Clay pause for thought, and he got caught by a couple of shots that he wouldn't normally get caught by. But then in the second round and the third round, he just comes out, starts digging the left straight to the body, and really puts Sana on the defensive, and Sana's just like covering up and trying to swing back with elbows. And he does catch Yod a few times, but mainly he's just sort of covering up. And I think that Sana will have watched that fight, because, obviously if you're coming into the second fight against one of the greats of Muay Thai and kickboxing, and he fought them once before, you're going to watch your previous performance. And I think Sana and his coaches probably realised that you were doing better than you expected, or than expected by most fans and pundits, but you allowed him to put you into like a passive state, or a defensive state, because in this one, he was banging Yod up with like right straights as Yod was trying to, because a lot of what Yod does is like he lands his punches or is whipping left round kick, and he can lean just back far enough. He's got a really good sense of distance, but obviously if you're fighting someone much taller, that sense of distance is going to be thrown completely out the window. So he's getting caught by like right hands while he was pulling back away from that. And you saw in this fight lots of times where Yod bit down on his mouthpiece and said, okay, I'm going to hit him as hard as I can, in an attempt to get him to back up a bit. And Sana did a really good job of just going, no, got to stay offensive, got to keep going, got to keep hitting him, and won the fight. And I don't think anyone disagreed with that decision. The Petrosian one was a bit more controversial, but really it was a close fight, so not too controversial. But I don't think you could have given this to Yod. Like, it would have been very hard to get away with that without a riot in the arena. So Sana looked fantastic. Mad props to him. Massive upset there. Then in your main event, I saw bits of the Holzken fight. I didn't see the whole thing. I didn't bother going back, but that was another upset. Holzken lost a decision. But in the main event, Christian Lee and Shinya Aoki, and I said this at the time, like, I feel like they thought this was their best chance to get a belt on Christian Lee, because Aoki, I think he's not won a fight outside the first round for since like 2012. He's a strong front runner. The thing he has is that he gets a hold of people. They are shocked by how strong he is and how good on the ground, and then he finishes them. If they last past the first round, he has a lot more trouble, because there's only so many times you're going to be surprised by a double leg shot off nothing. Once you've got a little bit of timing down on him, it's a lot easier. Like Edward Furlong smashed him a few years ago. That's how Shinya Aoki just won the belt back. That was such a weird way to win the belt back. It was like the guy who'd already beaten him once just forgot how to do all the things that he did the first time. But this fight, I mean, before this fight, I was putting up GIFs because I watched Christian Lee's career, which is very entertaining, by the way. Give it a watch. But I was putting up all the clips of him, like, grabbing the fence, obviously, right in front of Olivier Coste, who is almost always the ref in Christian Lee fights. And then he's the ref for this fight. And then Christian Lee is taken down and immediately does the old Fedor, sticks the elbow over the ropes so that you're not really grabbing them, but it is also illegal. And the ref's like, oh, no, it's fine. Lets Christian Lee bridge with his backs of his knees over the middle rope. So he bridges himself up off the rope. And then when Shinya Aoki's mounted on him with, I think it was like a minute 30 left in the round, they're near the ropes. Olivier Coste breaks them, fannies around for ages, putting them back in position, doesn't ever stop the clock. And he basically lets Christian Lee survive that round. And then Christian Lee comes out, throws punches at Aoki. Aoki drops to like his butt in the corner. And they showed the replay like 3 times, and every time they had to cut away because you couldn't see any punches landing. Olivier Coste is a suspiciously bad referee. That's all I'm going to say. He's suspiciously bad. You know, it was what one wanted Christian Lee to win here, but just so fucking shady. But then, you know, the guy who's in charge of their rules, as much as I love Matt Hume, he did do a quote-unquote fight with Ken Shamrock in Pancrase that he lost by Northern Lights suplex. So, yeah, the guy who's in charge of your rules, say no more, say no more. Just bizarre. And then Shinya Aoki had like a canned speech where he was like, "You are the future now." God, Martin Nguyen can't come back. Martin Nguyen can't come back fast enough to batter Christian Lee again. I love Martin Nguyen. I was watching, as I said, Christian Lee's fights this week, and mainly what I got out of it was like, I really like Martin Nguyen. He's fucking great. He was doing in their first fight, he was doing this. He was catching him with overhands because Christian Lee was taller and standing quite tall, but he also was stepping off to his left, like, you know, Willie Pep, where you step off with your feet parallel so that you're in like a horse stance, and then you come back in with the left hand so that you're turning on the balls of the feet into like a southpaw stance. And he was doing that with an overhand, but he was doing it on the counter. Like, as Christian Lee came in, he'd step out into that stance, come back with the left hand, and he knocked him down twice with that. Yeah, Martin was a badass. So yeah, I mean, coming out of this event, you know, what one wants is for you to say, oh, I guess there isn't that much of a gap between the UFC and one anyway, eh? And that's what they wanted with the Eddie Alvarez matchup. And really, you know, with the Sage Northcutt thing here, it doesn't really count. But fucking hell, was that a middleweight? What a silly thing for Sage Northcutt to do. But as I was saying in the lead up to this fight, 155, 145, there are so many killers out there that, yeah, you could take a random killer, you know, a random guy that you've probably not heard of, who's decent in the division, and put him in with one of the guys who's really good in the division, and they've got a good chance of giving them a good fight. You've seen that when, like, Lando Venata comes into the UFC to fight Tony Ferguson on short notice, or Alexander Hernandez or someone like that. Like, you know, especially with unknowns, it's so dangerous. If you're both coming up on the regional scene and you both go, okay, well, we've got limited footage to work on, that's one thing. But if you're like the known guy and you don't have much footage of the other guy, that's the most dangerous. But yeah, I saw a lot of like, oh, one's about to overtake the UFC, and with the UFC's awful paywalling their pay-per-views decision, you know, they're going to do some more damage to themselves, but one's going to have to be around for a while to do that, and the whole financial situation is so shady. Not even shady, just like obviously disastrous. But no, cannot recommend watching one enough. It was a bloody good event. And there was a Team Lake guy on earlier. Was that Esther Cow or whatever? Yeah, Team Lake. I'm thinking of doing like a Filthy Casual guide just on them, because they're fascinating. They're the former Wushu team who then came out and like put it on Bibiano Fernandez, Shinya Aoki, just these top-level guys, and these guys from this Wushu gym are coming out and throwing jumping back kicks at them and winning. But as I say, like, you know, when you're doing this whole, like, oh, well, clearly almost on the level of the UFC, I think in the lightweight and featherweight divisions, yeah, fine, that's a good... Their top guys probably do great against very good guys in the UFC. But try to remember that Brandon Vera is the one heavyweight champion, and likely to be the one light heavyweight champion as well soon. And Ong Le Shao, you know, the only time that you might have seen him was in the same tournament with Uriah Hall and Chris Weidman back in the day, and he got smashed in that. You know, there's some good guys there, but really tapers out towards the top. Which it does in the UFC too, but, you know, at least they've got all the good guys under one roof. Anyway, that was a lot of talk about one. Clearly they are taking over the marketplace. UFC on ESPN. Someone said about this that, you know, they're phoning it in. They tweeted, like, immediately when it happened, it came up on my timeline. Oh, God, it's Brendan Fitzgerald. They're definitely phoning this one in. Brendan Fitzgerald is fucking terrible. I mean, I try to like Paul Felder. I mean, I do like Paul Felder. I mean, his commentary's not great, but I do like him. But he was just talking to a brick wall in this one. And then some guy came to me and was like, no, there's plenty of commentators for the Brain Dead. Brendan Fitzgerald is excellent. And I was like, what is he excellent at that the Brain Dead are missing? And the guy just disappeared. Brendan Fitzgerald on his alternate account there. He had a couple of fun ones on this one, and then a couple of not so fun ones. Julio Arce versus Julian Erosa. Erosa, bizarre. I said online that it looked like he learned to box by watching Dominic Cruz and ignoring the footwork. Because, everything up from his legs. Dominic Cruz, you're going, ooh! And then his footwork is fantastic, so he can make it work. But Julian Erosa's standing in front of the guy, throwing wide looping arm punches, that are both wide and have no power, which is like things that shouldn't appear on a Venn diagram of punching. You shouldn't have powerless and telegraph overlapping each other. So, but Arse struggled with him. Arse, I love that his name's Arse. And then finally hit him with a head kick coming out of like a combination. It just like Erosa's hands were nowhere to be seen. He's got this hunched forward thing, and he's throwing flailing. Oh, it was so bad to watch. Jack Cummings versus Trevin Giles, meh up until the guillotine, which was great. Ed Herman versus Patrick Cummings. I mean, Zach Cummings was bulging over his shorts in this one, and then Patrick Cummings is looking like a chiseled Greek god with, one of those old-timey strongman mustaches. But I've still never seen Patrick Cummings win a fight, I think. I must have, because I watch all these events, and he's still here. He's been here since that DC fight. But I don't think I've ever seen... Oh, he beat John Vellante by decision. I'll tell you why I didn't see that one, because it was a John Vellante fight. And then he apparently got a majority decision over Jan Blachowicz back in 2017. Wow. Beat the ghost of Fei Zhao in 2015. But otherwise, he's 6 losses in the UFC. 7, Daniel Cormier. He beat Kyle Kingsbury, who retired. Did he beat Shoeface? Wow, he did actually beat Shoeface at one point. But yeah, I mean, just always loses in emphatic fashion. It just looked terrible here. Ed Herman's not great either. He's never been particularly great, but apparently he was considering retirement until he won this fight, and now he's back on the title express. But gets hit with a knee coming out of the clinch and just stumbles bizarrely. Terrible fight, but, light heavyweight, what do you expect? And the commentators were even selling it by being like, in this division, one win at the right time and you're in title contention. Like, oh, God. I can't believe how excited people seem about John Jones fighting another middleweight who's come up and shown how bad the light heavyweight division is. Like, why would you care? But anyway, Grant Dawson versus Mike Trezano. This was a great a little banger. Was it Dawson or Trezano? One of them did the Jacare thing where you're trying to get on the opponent's back along the fence. Maybe you got one hook in and you've got double underhooks, body lock, as opposed to a seatbelt. And he steps his free foot up on the cage and drives off to throw Trezano back towards the centre of the cage and sneak that other hook in. That was what Jacare was doing against Bristol, whatever his name was back in the day in Strikeforce. Love that move. But he also kept his toes in the fence for ages, and Keith Peterson didn't give a shit. Michelle Pereira came out of nowhere against Danny Roberts, running around spastically flailing, but absolutely brilliant. Loved it. I was half watching for a second, and he did some stutter step thing across himself and then came in with a punch and then tried to do a Showtime kick again. The second attempt at a Showtime kick. And the commentator's like, bit of capoeira there. And I was like, oh man, did he jinga? Did he do the Anderson Silva thing where you jinga into an attack, which I really like, but no one's really done since. Except Marcus Aurelio, not the one who submitted Gomi, but the capoeira guy. But the jinga's cool because you're coming in off a moving base and you're switching stances. So I like that a lot. But I clicked back and it was just like a spastic run across himself. He was like, oh, and then ran in. But no, the moment he took the pressure off Danny Roberts with the crazy shit, Danny Roberts stepped in and he timed him with a counter flying knee. Someone said to me that was fairly that was the most standard and boring bit of the fight, the flying knee. It was pedestrian by comparison with everything else. But really, what that was he put a ton of pressure on the guy, or kept the guy's head down with a ton of attacking, stopped for a moment, and immediately timed that counter the moment that Danny Roberts stepped in, being like, "Oh, it's my turn now." So regardless of what strikes were used, that was a good setup of a counter, just in the ebb and flow of the fight. Des Green beat Charles Jourdain. Aspen Ladd versus Sajara Eubanks, my girl, the queen, Sajara Eubanks. I actually held off on this one because people said it was the fight of the night. One fight of the night and people said it was good. So I held off on that and went back to it later. Wasn't great, if I'm honest. Just two lasses with no power and no boxing swinging at each other for the last round. So it was some nice guillotine and front headlock work from Aspen Ladd. because she's always entertaining on the ground, but her striking is garbage. And Sijara Eubanks' striking is garbage, but she's like, striking is my main thing. She's proud of her garbage striking. I did take to Twitter afterwards and was like, Valentina doesn't want none of those hands. And there's always like 3 people who take it really seriously. Oh, the division's a meme, guys. Just relax. Davey Ramos versus Austin Hubbard. I enjoyed this one a lot. Davey Ramos looked good. Austin Hubbard held out well, I thought, too. There was a nice, what they call the Rico toppler, what Marcelo Garcia did to Rico Rodriguez back in the day, and to Gabriel Gonzaga, 2 guys who are like 300 pounds when they're not in shape to compete in the UFC. When they're grappling, they're like 300 pounds. Marcelo Garcia's like welterweight, lightweight size. He's a unit. Like, I've seen him in person. He's chunky, but he's a small guy. So Marcelo will get the back body lock, and what he'll do is jump and put his feet in the backs of his opponent's knees and then pull them back on top of him. It's brutal, but Davey Ramos did that in this fight. It's really nice. Some nice work, like the guy was trying to Kimura him off the high crotch, and I was like, uh-oh. But Davey Ramos just did a little run the pipe dump, put him down on his back. There was a moment where he caught that Habib grip or the Dagestani handcuff, whatever you want to call it, and was just hitting that Hubbard in the face while mounting his legs. It looked a couple of times like he was going to get a finish, but didn't pull it off. But Davey Ramos looking good. I think that takes him to 4 on the trot, but his first in those 4 that isn't a finish. Charles Oliveira versus Nick Lentz. I went back and looked at it every way I could. There was no way that this match made sense. I've been saying this for like a week or 2 now. Like, what? Why? Yeah, Charles Oliveira on a 4-fight winning streak has beaten Nick Lentz once, and then it was beating him in a no contest too. Nick Lentz on a 2-fight win streak over less impressive competition. So what this says really is probably that they were struggling to find Charles Oliveira an opponent. But yeah, it does it again. People complaining about the upkick, but it didn't look like he was trying to full on punt the guy in the face. It looked like his foot, slapped against the guy's face while he was trying to squirm and play guard. But up until that point, he was winning, and then after that point, he was winning, and they gave the guy time to recover, so I really don't care much about the upkick. It was more like Brandon Vera, John Jones. Now that's the heavyweight title fight we need. Yeah, lovely right straight down the center, counted off a kick. Beautiful. Can't complain. Charles Oliveira, I think he's going to go down as a reminder of just how good you can be. And still not get a title shot in this lightweight division, because he always sort of stumbles at like the top 10 sort of guys, but he'll just murder other people who are really world-class fighters. Vicente Luke stopped Darian Krantz. As we said, Darian Krantz was 24-10 coming in, first fight in the UFC. Didn't really make sense. I think it did turn out it was a late replacement for someone, but it didn't seem like this guy was going to shock anyone. Luke caught him with a knee coming out of a clinch, I think it was. What's it called? I hate calling it a tie clinch. Double collar tie. Knee to the head, put him down on his face, hit him a few times. The guy was just covering up, and then stood up and went, "Well, why'd you wave it off?" afterwards, because that's what you do, just to put on a good show of things. Felicia Spencer versus Megan Anderson. Last week, or in the previous episode, I was like, I don't understand why everyone's so hype about Megan Anderson. Clearly, the only people who are hype about Megan Anderson are people who haven't actually watched her fights and have perhaps seen like the high kick against Charmaine Tweet. And we're like, oh my god, she's big, she's pretty hot, she's got cool tattoos, she could actually compete in this division without just being a giant lump of a bantamweight. Felicia Spencer came out she basically looked like Cindy Dandois, the last person to submit Megan Anderson. She fought like Cindy Dandois, took her down, didn't do like the lady's head and arm, I don't think, but took her down, got on her back, submitted her with almost no resistance. I think Cindy Dandois would do her again, if I'm honest. I was previously on that, like, her wrestling's gotten better trip, but Holly Holm humiliated her in the wrestling, and then Felicia Spencer had no trouble at all. So yeah, maybe Cindy Dandois would do her again. But people will be just as hyped the next time she fights, I'm sure. Seriously though, lovely girl, good podcast. Just not really ready to be world class in any division, but there are only 10 fighters in that division, so Ian Heinisch versus Shoeface. This was the most underwhelming, impressive upset I've seen, because I was impressed the entire time, but I was also like not excited. Did really well, kept getting back to his wrestler's base, building up, fighting the hands, turning into him. did some okay striking, grabbed the fence a little bit. I think they kicked each other in the junk. Someone got poked in the eye at one point. It was just a bit of a messy fight, but good for Ian Heinisch. Step forward for him. Sad for Shoeface, but, whatever. And then the main event was Rafael dos Anjos versus Kevin Lee, and it was sort of like what is becoming the Kevin Lee standard. Starts out incredibly, fades over time, and I don't want to make it feel. I'm definitely not criticizing Kevin Lee's heart or anything like that, because he gets hurt quite a lot in these fights, and then drives through and finishes a single or a double or whatever, and gets on top again. And even in the last round of this one, where he was very tired, he was still doing effective work, going after Rafael dos Anjos. But he becomes so much less effective over the fight. It's similar to the Conor McGregor thing, where like he uses a lot of his energy early on, and then he gets tired. And it's not like a comment on someone's heart; it's a comment on someone's cardio or conditioning. Conditioning is defined as ability to do the work over a time. Part of that is like cardiovascular. Part of that is how your muscles, muscular endurance and things. There's a whole series of energy systems that you can read about, but it's very boring. But I think like that's the thing. I don't think Kevin Lee's problems are, maybe some of them are mental, maybe some of them are like tactical, but I don't think that's really where he's going to make the biggest progress. I think a lot of it is being able to do what he does, but do it over 25 minutes, which is a very hard ask. You're asking someone to become more of an endurance athlete than a power athlete. And the other thing is that'll take time to do. Your body takes time to adapt to things, especially if you're already at an elite level in a sport. Adding to that is going to be difficult. So the thing is, like, you're not going to be able to change that in like one fight. Maybe you'll be able to change that over the course of like 8 to 12 months. But fighting absolute killers every time, a very difficult way to do that. I think Kevin Lee's management need to get him in with just another decent but not world-beating guy. So, because the Kevin Lee thing is that he either wins amazingly over very good guys or loses hard to really, really good guys. So I think probably what we want to see from him is like more of a focus on his own conditioning and fighting, and ignore the opponent. Have just okay opponents in the grand scheme of the division, rather than trying to be straight back into the title picture with his next fight. But Rafael dos Anjos, we all came into this thinking this is the kind of matchup that doesn't really favour Rafael dos Anjos. He hates the wrestlers who put the pressure on him and put him on the fence. And it started out that way, but I thought he did really well. I think part of that is that Kevin Lee is a finisher who likes to start fast and finish, whereas someone like Kamaru Usman or Colby Covington really not that concerned with picking up the finish. They're more there just to grind, and if the guy gives up his back and lets you have his neck, they'll take it or whatever. But they are very much like over the distance sort of fighters. Especially Usman, like he's there for 25 minutes, even if it's a 15-minute fight. But I also like that Rafael dos Anjos really was, like, he was attempting his own takedowns. He was turning Lee around and then he'd hit a takedown. You just really saw that he's a very well-rounded fighter. I love dos Anjos, but it would have been very easy to fall into the trap of being like, I'm sprawling and brawling, this guy's doing the grappling. And instead he was like, no, turning him around, well, I've got him at disadvantage now. I'll duck in on his hips, put him on his back, and we'll work from there. So not a terrible night of fights. A few good ones in there, I thought. Oliveira, lovely stuff. Ladd versus Eubanks wasn't that bad. Michel Pereira, obviously going to be excited for his next one. Davey Ramos, and Rafael dos Anjos. So yeah, cool. Not a bad night of fights, I thought. We've got a weird week with like no fights coming up. I mean, there is some interesting stuff coming up, like Cyril Gane is fighting at the weekend, so I might do something on him. I was thinking of doing a Filthy Casuals guide to sumo because the Hon Basho is about to start again. So yeah, there's some stuff to do, but let's take a question and then we'll get out of here until Thursday. Dear Jack the Ellipses, I've spent too long trying to come up with a good rhyme no one has used yet, and in doing so delayed this message. I give up. Buttering. I look forward to your podcast so much every week. You'll get my money on Patreon for the rest of my life. Generally, you rock and keep up the amazing work, please. Thank you so much. Question. So I've been listening to the Grange TV podcast, and I hear Bobby Knuckles talking about your boy, Ross Pearson's boxing fight. Rob was high on him and said that when he saw him in the UFC, he actually thought he'd have been better as a boxer than MMA fighter, but seemed to imply that it was a new start for Ross, and that he had a good chance of making another career out of boxing. Any thoughts? Also on the same podcast, and many prior to it, I've noticed that Whittaker frequently brings up the toll that fighting takes on fighters. He often cites the fight game, quote, just makes you tired, as a reason that many fighters have lost a specific fight that he's talking about, i.e. Jacare's last fight, Aldo, Silva, Thug Rose, and a few others. Should I be worried that Rob is tired, over it, ready to lose, and projecting, or is he just acutely aware and likes to talk about the side of the sport that many ignore? Lastly, a question about takedowns in the gi. I'm a decent-ish wrestler for BJJ guy and enjoy going for the takedown, but as people have become aware of my propensity and occasional success more and more, I'm met by people making high collar grips, even sometimes shamelessly double collar grabbing, dropping their head low, bending at the waist, and throwing their hips back 1,000 miles, stalling for dear life. It makes it so annoying to try and take them down that I've begun pulling De La Riva into sit-up guard and then trying to sweep to get on top. It's been working okay, but I feel really gay doing it. Please, Jack, help me save my manhood and tell me how to deal with that hips back, head down stalling. Cheers, Jonathan. Let's start at the top. So, Ross Pearson's boxing match. I thought it was really good. I thought his footwork looked really good. One of the problems with Ross, and I keep saying we're going to do this like career retrospective on a filthy casual guy. Hell, if he starts doing well in boxing, like, taking on up-and-comers and doing well, maybe I'll do it then and we'll pick up some viral traction. But one of the problems that he always had was that he had really good head movement, and he'd use that to get in on people. But you don't need to time him with knees like Dan Hooker did towards the end of his career. You just need to make him realize that you're throwing them, like knees and body kicks, body kicks that become head kicks if he ducks down into them. And once guys started kicking at him, he'd stop using his head movement so much and he'd be coming in on a straight line. And really, that's where his boxing was so much better. He was moving his head, slipping punches, getting in with counters and things. So if you watch like the Cub Swanson fight, there's loads of them. Like, he takes a few kicks on the arms while he's moving his head. He sort of bottles it on moving his head, and then he runs straight at the opponent and gets cracked in the face. But in this recent one, his footwork looked really nice. I think maybe it might even work out that like Ross wouldn't have been that good a boxer, but went to MMA because he had the best boxing he had definitely had some of the best boxing in MMA, certainly that style of boxing at least. But then in turn, like, now that he's taken that restriction, all those extra considerations out, maybe he finds boxing a lot easier, or becomes better at boxing as a result. Certainly must be nice to not have to worry about like a knee coming up and hitting you in the face when you're moving your head. I'd love to see him make a second run. I mean, how old is he? Okay, so he's 34, so that's not desperately late in the modern landscape of sporting, but it's still quite late to be a contender in boxing, especially as he's suffered some pretty bad knockouts already. But I love me some Ross. I found out the other day that he's married to one of the ring girls, and that's hilarious because what UFC event was I at? I think it might have been one of the O2 ones, or maybe Manchester, but it was the press conference was just starting. I've bailed on every press conference I've ever been to because they're so boring. And Ross Pearson, who's in an immaculate suit, peeks his head in from behind the table that they got set up with Dana White there and everything, with a gorgeous woman who I later found out was probably his wife, the ring girl, looks around the room, gives a wink, and then sneaks out the side door while they're doing the press conference. Because it was one of those ones where they had bigger names than were on the card, but just sort of milling around. I think that might have been the first time I saw Conor in person. And I was like genuinely underwhelmed, not like, looking someone up and down and underwhelming, but just not, how when you expect people from the telly to be big and spectacular. It's like when I met Judi Dench. She is fucking tiny. And that was really underwhelming. It's like, I wanted you to be bigger, love. But anyway, yes, all the best to Ross. I hope he wins a minor world title at least. On the subject of Rob, I wouldn't be surprised if he's got a pretty good perspective on fatigue and injury and things, because he, by all accounts, trains like a madman, takes it very seriously, keeps himself in shape all year round. You saw the clip of him on the Ultimate Fighter where he just ran that 5k easy while Kelvin Gastelum was like vomiting. But also really struggles with injuries. He's an injury-prone fighter and also has had like staph and all sorts of horrible things. So I wouldn't be surprised if he is aware of, or has mixed feelings about the fight game. But also he doesn't get to get in and fight that often, so he's probably still quite excited about it compared to someone like Jacare, who might have become a bit more of a job too. Certainly that last one against Manson. How are you supposed to motivate yourself when you're fighting a sort of unknown guy? In place of what was your biggest loss to your biggest rival, Yoel Romero. If you didn't see Rob, he was in the Abu Dhabi trials. I think he went out against Harry Kimura's, who is gigantic and yoked. Like Whittaker's there, not in fight shape, so he's like a bit puffy. And Harry Kimura's has these massive capped delts. I think it was Harry Kimura's. I don't want to accuse Harry Kimura's of being jacked if it wasn't Harry Kimura's. But he got heel hooked, and he clearly went in with the right attitude because he immediately tapped. He didn't try and fight the heel hook or anything. He was just like, okay, cool, you've got the position. Why would I risk my ACLs for this small time? Well, not small time tournament, but it's a qualifier for the Abu Dhabi when my job is to be the UFC champion. So a very good look, as everyone's always complaining that he's injury prone, and some people were super butthurt about him trying to go to Abu Dhabi. It's weird that they didn't invite him, actually. I think George St. Pierre got invited a few years back. Did Bendo qualify or get invited? I can't remember. But that just shows how unknown Rob Whittaker is. Anyway, gi takedowns, I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to help you much. My go-to gi takedowns are like grab a collar, drag and try and do like a sweep single, come up on the leg. I have no judo to speak of. I pull guard a lot more than I should. And when you say like throw their hips back and hold collar to get grips for dear life, I just think jump guard on their knee. That's what they deserve. I suppose learn some judo. I mean, the bits of judo I do know are from studying like the grip fighting and stuff. Travis Stevens and loads of people have good stuff. Ruddy Ferguson. There's loads of guys out. Jimmy Pedro also actually has a really good thing on grip fighting. And it's just, keeping that collar grip off. Because if you watch the judo at the Olympics, so much of it is like not letting the other person get grips more than it is about like jostling back and forward and hitting the throws. So, grip fighting is something you do all the time in BJJ, and I'm sure you would have done it from wrestling. So I suppose it's just more important to stop them locking in those collar grips than it is to have wicked throws for them. Or you make them reach and you attempt a winding arm lock, a wakigatami, just tear their arm off. Cheers, Jonathan. Right, I reckon that'll do us for this recap. If you want to get in on the extra content that I'm putting out every week for the Patreon boys, normally some fight stuff, probably going to be a history thing this week, or maybe a study on an old-timer, because there's not an awful lot going on. Or maybe, like I said, I'll do something on Cyril Gain. But yeah, join up to the Patreon. It allows me to be independent and also to have an active relationship with my fans and readers. It means that, should I ever say anything slightly too racist about the 52, you can go, oh my god, boycott Jack Slack, and that'll actually affect me. So yeah, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. All the work I do goes up on thefightprimer.com, whether it's for my site or another site, there's something there linking it to you. And I think that's all my plugs. Right. I will catch you later in the week. Michelle Pereira's spastic Jinga bless.